Today on StampTV, I'm going to show you a fun background technique that you emboss two ways to create a wet look with lots of texture. Let me show you the tools and products you need to make this card project. First, you're going to need an embossing folder, and the one that I'm using is by Lifestyle Crafts. This is their Goosebumps line, and this particular folder comes in a 2-pack called Tide. Then you're going to need some embossing powder, and I'm using the Gina Designs Fine Detail Clear Powder. You're also going to need some embossing ink, and I'm going to use the VersaMark ink along with the Embossing Magic anti-static pad to remove static from the surface of the card, but also any oils that might get on the surface from touching it and lotions and things like that. Then, for the card project, the colors that I'm using of cardstock are the Gina Designs White, Turquoise Sea, and our black Onyx. And here I have a couple of the vintage cuts. The ones that I'm using for this card are the vintage cuts in the fancy ovals in black, the fancy borders, and then also the plain ovals in white. For stamps, I'm going to use this little mini set. This is the Shine On mini stamp set. This was from an old StampTV kit back from last spring, but I like this one because it can be used not just for spring cards, but also for fall cards. And I wanted to show you that the picture on here is a little bit smaller than the actual size of the stamp. You can see the stamp is a little bit bigger. The greeting as well is a little bit bigger. And the two that I'm going to use here are the little bird with the umbrella and the greeting that says, "In any kind of weather, I'm here for you." Then you're also going to need some adhesive and scissors, and I'm using the Mono dot adhesive along with my Cutter Bee scissors. And I have the Tim Holtz craft pick along with one of our paper piercing templates. This is the square one. These come in a 3-pack, and I'm using the square one for today's card. I'll also be using some 1/4-inch pop dots, and then I'm going to choose some brads. And a lot of you have asked me how I store my brads. This is what I do. I have this little jar that I got from IKEA, and every time I get a new StampTV kit, I just throw the brads into this one jar, and all of my assorted brads are all in here. I just spill them out and grab the ones that I want. I like it this way. I know a lot of people like to separate by colors, but this makes it easy for me to grab and go if I'm taking my stamping stuff on the go. I'm also going to be using the Cuttlebug, and I'm going to be using the Marvy embossing tool. So the technique that I want to show you today is this embossing ×2. So I will be using my Cuttlebug for this. I'm just going to put this aside first. And then I'm going to grab a piece of the Turquoise Sea cardstock. Now this cardstock is cut to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. And I'm going to be using this along with some VersaMark ink, this Tide embossing folder, and the Embossing Magic along with my Gina Designs new Fine Detail Clear Embossing Powder. So I'm going to start just by rubbing the surface of this piece of cardstock with the Embossing Magic pad. And then I want to feel inside the embossing folder. Now, this is the side that has the detail lines, and that's going to push my design outward. This is the part with the flat part, the large flat area, and this is the side I'm going to ink up because I want my embossing, the wet embossing that I do, to be inlaid on this particular piece of cardstock. So what I'm going to do is take my VersaMark pad and I'm going to ink up the flat part of the embossing folder. And you want to get it nice and inky, but don't press too hard because you don't want any of that ink to seep into those recessed lines of the design. Okay. So now I'm going to make sure that the part of the cardstock that I used my Embossing Magic pad is going to be the part that touches the VersaMark ink. So I'm going to lay this down. Actually, I'm going to flip it around this way so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to line it up so it's nice and straight. And then I'm going to flip that over and press that down. Now, I'm going to grab the Cuttlebug, and I'm going to start with an A plate and a B plate. And then I'm going to lay that folder in there and put the other B plate on top, and I'm going to run it through the Cuttlebug. And that's going to press all of that ink into my piece of cardstock, but it's going to leave the top part of the design without any ink on it. So there, now I have that all inked up, and I'm going to add some embossing powder to this. Next, I'm going to grab a piece of scrap paper that's folded in half, and I'm going to use my clear embossing powder, and I'm going to throw that powder on top of this entire piece of cardstock. Now, I'm going to blow away the excess and a lot of that embossing powder is not sitting on top of the raised areas. And if you see any sitting on there, you can gently brush it off. And you'll have a little bit here and there, but just not a ton. Okay, let me put this back. You're going to love our embossing powder if you haven't tried it yet. It really creates a lot of detail, but it's also very, very smooth. Okay. And now I'm going to emboss that. And you should start to be able to see how the areas that are getting wet or getting glossy from the embossing powder are turning a darker color than the parts of the cardstock that don't have embossing powder on them, which is the design that's pressed in, or I should say pressed out. All right, I'm going to turn this and finish the other side. This really accentuates the design from the embossing folder, as you can see, and it creates a two-tone look. So now you have light parts where your raised images, and then you have darker parts that look all wet and glossy where the image is pressed in. So let me show you what I've done with this. I have another one here that I already did. You can see it's the same. And I mounted this onto a piece of black onyx cardstock. Now, my next step is going to be to stamp the greeting. And I've already done that using a little white strip of our Gina K Designs layering weight cardstock. Here I have two of our vintage borders, and I'm going to add a little bit extra tape here on the back. And then I'm going to add a little border on the top. I'm just going to line it up there like that. And if you want, you can center it even more just by kind of laying it down and finding the center spot on two of the different scallops. I'd say right about there. And we can just straighten it out like that. And you can make these as far in or as far out as you want. So let's say you just want a tiny little edge. Just move it down a little bit like that. I think I'll do that because that looks kind of cute. Just a tiny little edge there. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Just leaving a tiny little edge. And you do want to kind of line them up so that your scallops are the same on the top as the bottom. So just kind of eyeball that. There we go. So there are my little scalloped borders on there. Now I'm going to grab a pair of scissors. Let me move this one in just a hair. I'm going to grab my pair of cutter bee scissors, and then I'm just going to trim away the excess. Just kind of butting the scissors right up against the white piece of cardstock, like that. There we go. So now I have a pretty little scalloped edge, and this piece is going to go up near the top of the card. So I'll put that on now. And you can decide which way you want your waves to go. You might want them to face downward, or I like mine going up because they look a little bit more like waves that way. All right. Then I'm going to take this little stamp with this bird and the umbrella and stamp it, and I've already done that, so I want to show you how I colored it here. I used some of the Spectrum Noir markers. The colors I used are listed below the screen at YouTube and at StampTV. And then I'm going to use one of these fancy ovals and add a little scalloped edge around the bottom there, around the perimeter. And you can see that our fancy ovals and our regular ovals nest perfectly together, which is fun. Now, this is optional. You can add some little brads if you want, and I think I'm going to add 3 little black brads. Now I'm going to have to lean over this. I'm going to make marks using the paper piercing template, and this just helps you get your brads straight. Just line it up to a line like the edge of this white and have that be on a line on the template, and position it where you want it, and then pick a corner and add your brads. So I'm just going to add a brad here, a brad here, and a brad here. So I made the dots, and now I can poke through. Usually I have a little mouse pad here that I use to press the holes in, but I didn't bring that over here, so I'm just going to do it this way, but this works. Just make sure you keep your fingers out of the way of the back when you do it this way. And one more. Okay. So now I need to find some black brads. I'm just going to spill out my brads here and grab 1, 2, 3. There we go. And you can use any color you want, but I like to accent my cards with the same color that I'm using as my layering pieces, which is the black onyx in this case. So I'm going to pop those in, and you can see how that makes them evenly spaced. Let me open those up on the other side. And if you've never tried our brads, they come in our kits, and they're so nice and soft and easy to spread out, so you're going to like them a lot. All right. So now this whole piece is going to go onto my white card base. And I'm going to apply that using some of the mono adhesive. Put that in place. There. And now my focal image is just going to pop on there using some of these 1/4-inch pop dots. And you can use as many pop dots or as few as you like. I tend to go with about 4 when I'm using an oval or a circle, too near the top, too near the bottom, but you might want to add a few more. It's totally up to you. And that is going to go right about, maybe I'll move it over just a hair, right about there. Straighten that out. There we go. And there is my finished card project. Try this background technique with all different shades of blue to create the look of water, or try it with bold red, brown, or black for the look of patent leather.